To our third event in the speaker series for the year. So the first one we had in February, that was Dr. Bill Lafayette giving an overview of some of the growing communities in Ohio, and just evaluating where Marysville kind of compares within that, the community peers. And then last month we had Stillwater Farms developer come talk a little bit about that development and what they are hoping to do in Marysville. And so today we're going to give a kind of state of housing in the region that looks at the county level and then overall in the region. So I'm Savannah Allen. I work with County-Marysville Economic Development, and I'm going to start off with a brief economic development update. So what do we do? Economic development, it's one of those words, one of those things you hear all the time, and the first things people think of is jobs, right? Which is absolutely correct. Jobs and economic development do go hand in hand, but it's also more holistic than that. Whenever you take into account, it deals with quality of life improvements, and jobs are a part of that. But that also includes, business development and community development. So some of our day-to-day things that we do in economic development are we work with our community and municipality partners. So the City of Marysville, Union County, some of our townships, we work hand in hand with those municipalities to kind of plan for the future, see if there are any pressure points, any of that kind of stuff. We help administer grants, so help fund, there's, especially post-COVID, there's a lot of federal grant money and state grant money out. So that's one of the things that we do. We also respond to leads. So and that's part of my responsibility, is we work with our regional partner, One Columbus, that works with the state economic development partner, Jobs Ohio, to get new industry in. So we respond to leads to see if there are any new entrants into the businesses that want to come in. We also help with workforce talent efforts. So we work with our education partners, all of the different career techs, and we have 4 school districts in Union County that we work with to really kind of be that connection between industry and education to make sure that we have that workforce pipeline. But we also do a lot of the community development. So, the downtown revitalization, we're working with Heritage Ohio to do a Main Street program in Marysville. We are looking at, civic infrastructure, how to improve walkability, drivability, that kind of stuff. So those are some of the things that we do, and we're unique compared to some of our peers in the region because we are a public-private partnership. So while we do work a lot with the county and the city, we're a public-private partnership, so we don't directly work for them. And so it allows us to, I think, kind of broaden our scope of making sure that we do that quality of life development and community development improvement. So this is just a brief overview of all of the different organizations that we work with. Another reason why we're unique here in Union County and Marysville is because we work with, it's basically 4 organizations all intertwined. So we have the CIC, which is that public-private partnership that I talked about. So that's myself, Eric Phillips, the director, and then Luke Fleming, the project services manager. And then we also have the Port Authority, which is an organization that helps us give a little bit more flexibility with some incentives but we don't really have anybody that works for the port. It's just kind of a tool that we can utilize. But then we have the Chamber of Commerce. So we have Tanya Woodruff and Mallory Lader, who helps with that. And so they have over 550 businesses that are members. And the things that Chambers does, it helps improve our business-to-business connections within the community. And so we work with them. We're in the same office as them, and we help with kind of improve those connections. And also in our office is the Union County Tourism. So, tourism isn't maybe something that you think about whenever you think economic development and kind of how it interacts, but because of the work that the tourism group does, they actually have, the work that they do supports over 1,800 jobs, because if you think of, whenever you go on vacation, what do? You shop, you dine, you visit. And so they help with all of that, all of those different things. And so they also help a lot with the revitalization efforts of uptown areas. So those are all of our different organizations that we all kind of call, economic development partners, because they all are involved in improving the quality of life of our residents. So economic development, we have a lot of activity going on. So we have some recent major industrial projects. Scott's Miracle-Gro, they're building the 1.3 million square foot distribution center on Industrial Parkway. Honda has recently committed to retooling their facility in Marysville, which is great news for us as they transition to EV technology. And then we also have other new businesses that come in. So we have Ease Logistics, who is working to expand in the Innovation Park. And then Ohio Laser and Velocis, they are existing companies that have chosen to commit to expanding in Union County. So a lot of industrial projects that are going on. But we also have quite a few commercial projects going on as well. So a lot of these are newer ones. So we have Ill Mannered Brewing that's coming into the uptown area in Marysville. We have Retreat 21, which is on Industrial Parkway, so it's a wedding and event venue. We also have the Grange Hall, which is in Richwood. So one of the things that makes Union County and Marysville so greatly positioned is we're a community that has a lot of versatility and diversity whenever it comes to development. And why that's great is because it helps to increase the tax base and reduce the tax burden for residents that exist here. So because you have industrial companies coming in and creating new jobs, that's fewer taxes for the residents to pay. Because you have commercial, you get more things to do because of that tourism piece as well. So it really helps make the community a lot more diverse, having all of those different pools to have revenue come from for the different municipalities so they can increase services. But then also, businesses too. Businesses like to see that growth and development because that makes it less risky for them to open up a small business or for them to locate here. Also for some of these larger companies, I know we hear Target and Kohl's all the time, businesses like that, they need to have that population growth. They need to hit certain thresholds before they want to come here. So those are some of the things that we see from all of these companies that are wanting to come into Union County and Marysville. And so kind of talking about that too, one of the reasons why we're these are many reasons why we're growing. So we have proactive governments. We have governments that want to work together and cohesively to kind of help shepherd some of that growth. You can't turn a blind eye to some of this stuff because Marysville and Union County is a great place to live and people are going to come here because of that. And so making sure that we plan for that will really help so that we don't kind of pigeonhole ourselves later down the road. We have attractive downtowns. We have outstanding schools. That's one of the first questions that we get whenever we have companies that want to come here or whenever we have businesses that want to expand. It's important that they have that pipeline, that education pipeline. And then industry clusters, of course, with Honda and Scott's. So we have their peers or their suppliers that want to kind of center around where those industries already exist. So quickly talking about some of that population growth. I know that there's you might think that we've had explosive growth or exponential growth, but really we've had a steady pace of growth over the last 20 years. So roughly we're growing about approximately 1,000 people a year. which for the county equates to 3 people a day. For the city, it equates to about 1.2 people a day. So it's not really that drastic. It's still very manageable as we kind of continue to see some of that growth happen. One of the things we did last year is we did a survey for all of our new residents coming into town. We asked them, what do you think is so great about Marysville? Why did you come? Why do you want to be here? And so this is the results from that specific question. We asked a lot of different questions, but from that question specifically, most of the time you might think that people move because of a job, because they want to live closer, but really it's because of a better community. They may have lived in Dublin or Columbus or even from out of state, and they recognize that this is a community that they feel at home in. And so that's the main reason. Almost 41% people said that that's why they moved here. And then the other reasons are closer to family, and then employment being third, and affordability being fourth. So, and then, because economic development is jobs, one of the things is jobs. So today we have a workforce shortage. It's not anything new. Everybody has talked about it, especially since COVID. But there's over 7,000 jobs within a 20-mile radius of Marysville. And it does include a little bit of Columbus, but for the most part, that encompasses all of Union County. It's been that way for 2 years. Ever since I've been here, we've had that many jobs or more. There's been times where it's been closer to 11,000. One of the things that I do is they're called business retention expansion visits. So we get out to the community, we talk with some of our employers and see what the pressure points are, and overwhelmingly it's been workforce. And so that's sometimes difficult for us to hear because we can try to help. We have great education partners, but really some of that is you're going to have to fill with new people coming into the community. And so one of the questions that comes up is, well, what happens if year over year over year we have these companies that are not able to fill those positions? They're going to stop growing. They're going to stop expanding. They're going to reduce how many employees they have. They might move somewhere else where they do have that employee base. And that is something that will lose employers if year over year over year that continues. But the thing too about getting jobs, having new jobs come into the community is not everybody who is employed here works here. Union County is unique. I've said that a lot for many reasons, but one of them is that we are a net importer of jobs. It's not something that you usually see of a more rural community. Most of the time people leave to go to metropolitans like Columbus for jobs, but we actually have more people coming in here, which that helps with some of our commerce kind of stuff. So whenever you see some of the more commercial companies come in, that helps by having people that people work here. But we also have about a little bit over 8,000 people who work and live in here. So that's kind of where we're at right now with some of our conversations that we have with businesses and why it's important for us to help with the sustainable growth that we have in the community, because that's part of sustainable growth, is making sure that our businesses can succeed in the long term. So that's all I have today. So Jon Melchi is going to come up here and talk a little bit more about the state of housing in the county. And so Jon is from the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio region. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off.
Thank you, Savannah. Hi, good evening. Jon Melchi, Executive Director of the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio, or BIA. For those of you unfamiliar with us, the BIA, we are in our 80th year of existence, representing the residential development industry in Central Ohio. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak with you. This is a really innovative forum and setting, and applaud Eric Phillips and the economic development team and all the leaders here in Union County for hosting these forums. Since I am in Union County, I like to remind everybody I did my Scott's Step 1 lawn treatment 2 weeks ago, and my Honda is parked in the public parking lot. So there we go. All right. So it is economic development, and a home is where a job goes to at night. And you cannot have human resources without humans. And this is increasingly a challenge in Central Ohio, and I'm glad to be here to talk about that today. So just some key stats right off the bat. 88 counties in Ohio, 62 of them lost population by the last census update. Only 10 counties grew in population. 8 of those are here in Central Ohio. So, quite frankly, the burden of the state of Ohio is on Central Ohio. If this state does not produce economically, or if this region does not produce economically, this state is going to face serious challenges. So it's really important that we continue with the progress that we've had. 89 people a day, my friend William Murdock is speaking after me, and this is a MORPSI updated projection, are moving here to the Central Ohio region. We don't expect this to slow down anytime in the future. These people are coming. We may not have invited them, but they're coming. So how are we going to handle that? And the number's 34% and 60%. In Central Ohio, only 34% of the people in the 10-county Central Ohio region can afford to buy a new house today. Only 60% of the people who live in our region can afford to buy a house. That's problematic. And a lot of that is due to the cost increases associated with lack of inventory and supply in Central Ohio. So Savannah talked about it. We hear about this explosive growth we've had in Central Ohio. Well, you know, we're growing. I like to say in Ohio, we're the fastest slow kid. But when you compare us to an Austin, Texas, a Charlotte, a Raleigh, and a Nashville, that is what explosive growth looks like. 45,000 housing permits. And you say, well, we're not like them. Well, ask Eric Phillips that, because that's who he's competing against when he's trying to keep jobs here and bring those jobs here. That's who he's competing against. And they are providing more housing opportunities for the residents. You know, but we've done an okay job in Central Ohio, and we permitted just about 12,000 housing units last year. Not nearly enough. BIA, we did a housing study, showed we needed to be building between 16,000 and 19,000 housing units annually. And that's been the case for some time. We keep having a shortfall that compounds and compounds. You say, well, we're doing better than Cincinnati. I don't know if that's a standard we want to use here, but it is what it is. The thing that concerns me is look at Indianapolis. And that brown, the far right chart there is your single family housing developments. Indianapolis and Columbus are pretty common markets, a lot of similarities. Why on earth are they building 2,500 to 3,000 more single-family homes than we are in Central Ohio? And quite frankly, the answer is a willingness at the local government level to approve those homes. So jobs and housing, they go hand in hand. Historically in Central Ohio, for every job we've created a housing unit to go with it. And really, since the Great Recession, we've been at a deficit. And it's not just a Central Ohio problem. This is a challenge we've had throughout the United States. But in growing areas, it gets exacerbated. And what happens is, the jobs keep coming, but the housing doesn't get built. And it becomes more difficult for people to live near their work. And we know that when employees live closest to their places of work, the retention levels go up, and that's important to employers. So I said we needed between 16 and 19,000, and we've been at about 12,000. And people say, that's just too many houses. Well, except we did it before. If you look to the late 90s and the early 2000s, we consistently built around that level. And we did so with less people. And these are numbers that are certainly obtainable to us in this market. And it can be done. And the orange graph indicates our single-family construction, and the blue, the multifamily construction. And we're going to see more and more of both types of product that are needed in our market to meet the demand that's out there today. This stat is one that always gets people, and this will show you the increase of the cost of housing as it relates to the incomes that have increased in those counties. And as you see, the price of housing has completely outpaced wage increases. And we have good paying jobs here in Central Ohio, but they simply have not been able to keep up with the price of housing. And when you look at that, what it does to people is it puts more pressure on that housing burden, where as opposed to a third of their income, we have people spending 40, 50+% of their income on housing opportunities. And that is a real challenge for families. That's a real challenge for our neighbors, and it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. You want to see what this looks like, go to a San Francisco. Go to those places where the housing supply has been limited. The wage growth does happen, but it's not going to keep pace. So some Union County numbers. I was corrected here earlier. I said there was 120 listings in Union County. I was corrected by Katie earlier, who told me there's 64. So that means right now, if you want to buy a house in Union County, you got 64 options. $416,000 the average price of a house here. 12.5% of Union County residents can afford to buy a new house today in Union County. 12.5%. 67% can afford to buy an existing house. That ticked up a little bit recently. Not sure what the anomaly is there, but the high water mark was about 79% a few years ago, 80%. And you need to earn a little over $20 an hour to afford an apartment, a base level apartment. And with 96, 97% occupancy, that number is going to go up consistently. So those are just your Union County numbers as they exist today. So our building permits in the county, just reviewing those for everybody. I got a laser here, how about that? We have seen a pickup. This last one's a forecast of where we should be. But as you can see, the last 12 months, we've just not been where we need to be, a little over 700. Projected somewhere between that 700, probably need to be closer to the 900 home range. And we were there a little bit. One of the big gaps you see here, though, is you really went, 20 plus years without a multifamily project in the county. And what that does is it throws off your housing balance and your housing structure. So there's been a little improvement on that, and that's good to see on the building permit side. But we need to see more. And that's because the jobs have continued to locate here. So those numbers need to continue to go up and will likely. Blue line here shows the average cost of a new construction. Orange will show you the cost of existing construction. And as you can see, these numbers used to be pretty close together. Then they get further and further away, and now we're pushing up towards $600,000 to buy a single-family house in Union County, and on that single-family number, $400,000. So it continues to go up, and again, affordability for our neighbors and for our residents. All of this primarily driven by lack of supply in the marketplace. So what does that mean? Here's your new home inventory graph for the county, and as you see, we used to have a pretty good. I don't know that that's. When you had 1,200 units approved, we're down to 18 months inventory of approved lots. It's not good at all. And I want to address a little misnomer sometimes that happens is, some community will say, we approved 300 or 100 home development in our community, and you said we need to build XYZ number of housing, so we've done our part. Well, a single-family development, once you get approval, it could take another year before you break ground. And from that point, even the best-selling communities might sell 30 homes in a year. Might sell 30, and get them built and occupied. So, if you have that 100 units approved, there's a good chance it's going to take 6 years from the time the zoning goes through, engineering goes through, construction takes place, and homes get built, sold, and occupied before that community's out, which means we need a broad pipeline. We can't just rely on one project to be built. We need multiple projects going at the same time so that we can hit those numbers that are out there. So if a 500 housing unit development gets approved, 500 homes are not going to be built at once. It is going to take an awful long time, probably a decade, before that would get built out. And that's been the case across the region for some time. On many multifamily projects and infill projects, they take an awful long time to get together as well. So even I asked one of our multifamily developers, what's the fastest you could get a project done after approval? And the answer was 2+ years. And that means you've already been approved for zoning and there's utilities at the site and everything's ready to go. So that means we've got to continue to feed this pipeline of housing that's out there because there's not enough out there for us to build upon. Another question I get regularly, the size of lots. They have continued to shrink across the United States. So in the red are 2021 numbers, blue the decade before. As you see, we're at over 50% of homes are really 1/5 of an acre or smaller now. And that is a national trend. Our builders are not in the business of building things that people don't want. And what our consumers are telling us is that they do not want to spend a lot of their time mowing their yards anymore. And side yards have become a thing. I know, listen, I like to mow my grass. Told you I like my Scott's stuff because it gets me out of the house a little bit. But by and large, most consumers, that is not what they want. The disagreement comes from communities where people who live there existing say, well, that's not how I would want to live. And I understand that. Everybody's allowed to have an opinion. The good thing is you don't have to buy that house. But our builders are pretty confident that somebody would buy that house. And there's very little property value associated with and value of housing associated with the side yard. So we continue to see this trend. It is not going to change. And I want to just add just a little number for you. For every $1,000 a price goes up on a house, 1,000 people in Central Ohio are priced out. So if you want a lot size that's, say, 50-foot lot, and the builder says we want to do a 50-foot lot, and residents say, no, we need more, we want to keep our rural feel, and we'll approve a 70-foot lot. Well, you've added roughly about $25,000 in cost just to develop the lot. And that means 25,000 people are priced out of that house and are not able to buy it. So those costs continue to add up. And I think we're going to continue to see trends towards smaller lot development. People would rather spend the money on the inside of the house as opposed to the outside of the house. And that's just a trend that, is not a Central Ohio thing, it's just a national thing. Few things a healthy housing market has. We wish we didn't have to have subsidized housing, but we do. And to ignore that problem would be wrong. And it's a challenge that's out there. We need to provide opportunity for people to move up. And they need an opportunity to move up because ideally somebody in subsidized can move to more of a workforce housing. We also then need a missing middle housing. I get asked all the time, your builders don't build these starter homes that they used to build. It's not for lack of want. But the first-time home buyer options are increasingly becoming attached townhomes. So that's what we're going to have to look at for those missing middle housing. And your move-up housing is, and then, yes, you need high-end housing. You need more of everything. We need more of everything to have a healthy housing continuum. And I think because of interest rates being what they are, a lot of our people in this move-up category are going to stay there for a little while. And with the 88 people a day moving here, and people kind of staying put, the only way to alleviate that problem is to add more inventory. So big obstacles we face, and I'm getting the hey, yeah, to hurry up here. Length of time for zoning. Time is money, and the longer it takes to get approvals, and the more money that takes to be spent during that process, ultimately is passed on to the renter or to the buyer. Densities. We need to address these issues. If we can make better use of the land that we have, we can preserve more of it down the line. We just have to do so in a smart way. And density in Union County does not have to be the same as density in the city of Columbus. but having density gives the developer much more options, and it gives the community more options for land preservation. Architectural standards, it adds cost, oftentimes very little value, and the length of time for development plans to be approved. These all add costs to our development. Economic development is the reason we're here. Just a reminder, building houses creates jobs, 2.9 for every house that gets built. Revenue generated, they're buying products from your local companies. They're spending money in your restaurants as they're getting built. And if you know people looking for jobs, there are more owner-operated companies in the residential construction industry than just about any other field in the United States. So come over to our industry. You can start your own business. Schools. Schools is a huge challenge. And it's a huge challenge in the state of Ohio because we have a reliance on property tax to fund our schools. It was ruled unconstitutional in the early 2000s. It's not changed. There's a lot of problems that you can fix at the Ohio State House. This would be one of them I'd like to see them fix. We have about 10 to 20% estimated, I heard today, of school districts that are growing in the state of Ohio. The remainder are flat or losing population. So that means dollars are going out to school districts that continue to have dwindling population. Meanwhile, growing school districts continue to get less and less of what should be coming to them. We face challenges on how to educate kids. I hear oftentimes, well, your property tax, this single family house does not pay for that student. Well, guess what? Property taxes are supposed to pay for students, not just residential property taxes, commercial property taxes, industrial property taxes, retail property taxes. All of that goes into one pot. It is not simply residential development should pay for students in and of itself. That's a misnomer of an argument. It's a challenge we face, but I'm going to steal a line from one of our great builders here. Name me a place where we're building homes in Central Ohio where the schools got worse. They don't exist. So where we're building homes, the people moving into those homes are committed to your community. To Savannah's point earlier, why they're moving here, community. They want to be a part of the community. They're going to invest in the community. I will add, oftentimes we hear multifamily housing going in, they're going to flood the schools. That's not true. Let you in on a little secret. Sometimes multifamily housing is the best thing for your schools. They don't put very few kids through, and they generate a lot of property tax. There's my information. I know I ran a couple minutes over, and I will have a Q&A here at the end, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you guys on housing. And I'm going to pass, I'm going to let William walk up here, to my friend William Murdock from Morpsey.
Well, good evening, everybody. Again, I'm William Murdock with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Our friends call us Morpsey. I love being in this space with you, and you heard a lot from Jon this evening about housing and all of the aspects that go into it. You heard from Savannah on economic development. I'm going to continue that theme, but I also want to recognize that my slide's not up. There it is. I made the mistake of caffeinating at 5 o'clock outside at the cafe. So I'm going to move quickly. We're talking about growth, and at Morpsey, we work all over Central Ohio, in all of these counties with 85 different communities, and most of them are feeling the pressures of growth. Most of them are trying to grapple with what it means and where it's going and how they maintain their quality of life. And I'm going to go through some of the same information, some of the same trends, but I think it's important to pause for a second and know that these conversations are not easy. They're hard. But I also know that as somebody who grew up in Central Ohio, our communities keep getting better. And I grew up in Westerville, which reminds me a little bit of Marysville. And when I grew up there, they were experiencing a lot of new housing growth. My high school was out in a cornfield. It's not anymore. And I was just there prior to this at another meeting, and I'm just struck by how Westerville grew in a way that made them more like themselves. It made it better. It improved their quality of life. And that takes planning. That takes intent by a community to do that. And you'll hear us say at Morpsey, we want to grow better as we grow bigger. And that's what I think. When I think of Marysville and the growth that you've experienced, Marysville is more like itself. It's continuing to add character, it's continuing to add options, it's continuing to be a great place to live that attracts people. And so if we do this right, if we plan, we can make this community even better. And we're fortunate to be in a community like Marysville. We work with the city and the county. They've done that planning, they continue to do that planning, they continue to engage residents. It's so important to be intentional about growth. So let's talk about that growth. Why is it growing? We keep saying this, Central Ohio is an attractive place to be. We have strong job market, strong quality of life. We're still relatively affordable housing when you look at nationally. We've got strong suburban communities. This is a place that people want to stay and that people want to move to. Let's dig into the numbers a little bit because we talk a lot about growth, but it's manageable. Jon hit on this a little bit. At MORPC, we research and we forecast growth. We're expected to go from about 2.4 million as a region, so that big map, to 3.1 million by 2050. That is growth. That's growth that we have to plan for, but it's manageable. When we look at these other places like Austin or Charlotte, this growth is much slower than that, and that means we have the opportunity to do that planning and investing now to continue to make it manageable and get it in front of it. We are one of the stronger growing areas of the country, certainly the only one in Ohio and sometimes only one in the Midwest. Columbus is one of the fastest growing communities in the country, but again, it's not as fast as those top communities that are growing. It's much more manageable. What does that translate to as we look as a region? So we think regionally, we're gonna add about 726,000 people. That means we're gonna need more houses, so about 270,000 houses across that whole region. We're gonna need additional jobs to support it too. But we're also experiencing some really interesting trends at the same time. When we look at how this growth is happening, it's different than it used to be because our natural rate of growth is actually changing. And what you see in this chart here is the surplus of births to deaths, so net growth. So people are having more babies, they're living longer. We're actually seeing that go down because people are postponing having kids or they're not having kids. And in these last few years, we've actually seen that trend accelerate. And that means that even if we're experiencing all of these things like growth, it's not gonna look like it was in the 50s or the 80s or the 90s because the underlying demographics don't support that growth being explosive. The other thing we're seeing is that growth is not gonna happen uniformly. You're not gonna see high rises in cornfields. You're not gonna see growth in every part of Central Ohio. When we look at this map, what we know is we know that growth is attracted to communities of quality. And when you look at a place like Marysville, it's gonna be natural that as people are looking to move or to stay or to relocate, they're gonna be looking for those places that are high quality. Savannah had a really great survey. If you looked at those top two things, the top two reasons people were relocating to Marysville, I wrote them down, to be close to family and for a better community. So the quality of your community, it's no surprise that as we grow, people are gonna be interested in that. It's also important to know these are not just strangers moving here, but a good part of our growth is about folks who wanna move closer to family, who wanna be in the community they grew up in, maybe where their kids are. So this growth isn't strangers, it's often the people we know in our own family. The other thing I'll say about that is when we look at a place like Marysville, just like other communities of quality, when we look at growth, they want to be close to Marysville. So if you're a community like Marysville, one of the things that we see across our region is communities need to think about how to accommodate that growth in a way that really enhances their character. Because once you cross city limits, unless you've got really good relationships with your neighbors, you lose that ability to plan, and you lose that ability to improve the quality and the character of your community as you're growing. So that's something to think about that I know a lot of communities around the region we work with are thinking about and doing a lot of planning. Marysville in particular stands out because you've updated your zoning code, you've looked at comprehensive planning, you continue to talk to the community. That's really important. Another factor driving growth, I don't have to tell this room about the impact of Honda and them doubling down on their investment in Union County and Logan County. What's happening though beyond that is if you can kind of look at that map, that's the core of the region. Here's Marysville. You have the Indel project, which is the largest economic development project investment in Ohio's history. And Honda's building a new facility down in Fayette County, just outside of Jeffersonville. And when you look at these circles, these are drive times. And why is that important? Because we did the dark areas are 20 minutes, then 40 minutes. When people are looking to relocate or be near an employer, we've talked to these employers, they're looking at that 20 to 40 minute range. If you're a supplier for Intel or Honda, you're looking at that 20 to 40 minutes. That means that with Honda's reinvestment in Union County, plus these other things, Union County, Marysville is going to continue to be a really attractive place, both for economic growth and to move here. Let's dive a little deeper into just Union County. So your growth, it's happening, but it continues to be manageable. What we see when we measure that is since the 2020 census, so the last 3 years or so, you've added about 2,000 people in Union County. So this meets our long-term trends. When we look at where Union County is going through 2050, yes, we're expecting about 40 or 50% by 2050, but it continues to match that growth rate that you've been seeing. So this is not something where we're expecting to have a major spike in growth. This is something that we think that communities can plan for and really get in front of. So Jon talked a lot about the housing market. I'm going to hit on some of these trends again because it's important to know that the context of what's going on in the region is impacting what's happening here in Marysville. We're not building as much housing as we used to. In fact, the last 10 years, we've not built as much. We're not building enough housing to support the growth in jobs that we're seeing. When we look at those markets we're competing against, the Columbus region actually is building significantly less than the jobs that we're adding. When we look at the raw numbers, we're building less housing than we were when we were a region. And Jon talked about this. In 2002, we were building more housing in this region with 400,000 less people. Think about that. We've built way more housing before, so the pressure we're seeing is nothing like we were even expecting 20 years ago. The good news is Morpsey and a lot of our communities, including Marysville, we've started to study this. We've been looking at recommendations. We have something called the Regional Housing Strategy, which has 111 different recommendations. We'll share the website with you, but the idea is we looked market by market because the growth that's going to happen in Marysville, the housing needs in Marysville look a lot different than Westerville. They look a lot different from Columbus or Licking County. So we wanted to make sure we made it true for each community. And when we looked at this, these are the things that Jon had talked about. We're seeing competition for housing. We're seeing housing instability. We're seeing the market ask for different types of housing, maybe smaller lots than we had before. The overwhelming consensus that we see is around the country when we look at markets like this, healthy housing markets really get to where the market is going, they get to where demographics are going, and they have a mix of housing types and prices. A good way to think about this is to go back to that discussion about your family, where when you are looking at your community, can your kids afford to have their first apartment here? If you want to retire and stay in the community, do you have an option, whether it's senior housing or just to downsize a little bit? If you've got a family member who's moving to town, do they have that option? It doesn't mean uncontrolled growth, but it does mean that when you think about the types of housing that you have throughout your life, Marysville could be a community that supports people throughout their lives, and that's something that community after community in Central Ohio is doing a lot of thinking about. We also know that the market's changing. People are wanting housing with amenities. They want to be located near places where they can walk to ice cream, walk to school. They want parks. They want different options. Marysville has a lot of these. This is why people are thinking about your community as one of the top places in Central Ohio. This is a good thing, though, because we've studied this, and all of these options, when you look at a place like Marysville, when you look at the style of development that's here, it actually tends to be one of the most efficient. It helps the environment, it helps traffic, it helps all of these things. We also know that we want to bring options, and I mention this because Marysville's been a big leader in this. People want housing, but they also want different transportation options. And Marysville Union County has been a long partner in advocating for adding passenger rail back to our this community. And just, 2 weeks ago, we actually applied for federal funding to restore passenger rail that would go from Columbus to Marysville on up to Lima and Chicago. And when you think about that as a potential option, think of how that adds to the value of your community. Think of how it adds to that options and really can even build on the tourism that Savannah talked about too. We also know that part of what people are looking for housing is they want to be near trails, they want to be near parks. You know this really well. You've continued to do investments in this. You know that the more you have trails and access to parks in your community, the more people tend to want it. This is something we're seeing that makes you attractive, and that as you're developing, you should continue to advocate to build and add those amenities to your community. If you do all of these things, you'll continue to be an attractive community. And I'm going to finish just by saying, when people think about growth, it's easy to think about kind of places without character, places that don't look like the place that you love. What we're talking about is communities that can get in front of it and find a way to make growth, build on that character. You already have places like this just out this front door. When we look at communities that are continuing to grow, they're improving their character, they build on these amenities, they build on these characteristics. They don't stop growth, they try to make it look more like they want to be. And that's why I'll finish by saying we're growing in Central Ohio, but we're actually planning pretty well for this growth in Central Ohio. And if we do this right, we can continue to grow in a way that makes us grow better as we grow bigger. And I appreciate your time this evening. I think, Savannah, we're mostly on time, and we'll get to some questions. So thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you, John. Eric Full, second on the director. We're going to open up for some Q&A. You have a couple seats, hot seats to ask some questions. We do want to know that this is being taped, so this will be online. You can view this, share this with your friends if they want to see the session. But again, John and William do so many great things for this region. We appreciate their leadership. We appreciate their thoughtfulness and their interest in Union County and Marysville. And again, let's give them one more round of applause. So any questions? Now the questions we asked to keep to a minute, and they're actually questions that would be most helpful that you asked tonight to give our experts here a chance to respond to those questions. So anyone have a question? Katie does.
So I just want to ask, this was a very mellow presentation. I mean, there was a sense of some importance, but for us in the real estate industry, there is a real sense of urgency, like extreme urgency for the issues. And I'm wondering, I know it's not great to use scare tactics, but we have, for example, a new Honda hire with his family living in a home 2 suites because he has nowhere to live. How urgent is this situation? And can you talk about that? Because I know growth has been given a dirty word, but at some point, these employers are going to have an issue. Who wants to have their family living in a home 2 suites? Because we can't improve growth here.
Do you want to start?
Sure. This is a significant challenge for the region. At all levels of housing, there isn't enough, and it's impacting people's day-to-day lives in significant ways. When you talk about kids who don't have housing stability, how are they expected to perform well in school? And you have employees that we all bring to the office, and they're staying at a home 2 suites, and I'm sure it's a fantastic place. I don't know anything about it. It's really difficult for those employees to perform to the level that they need to, and it's not good for anyone. What we have is ultimately a question of political will. Our builders can't build anything without the approval of the local communities. And we have choices. And people are going to have to take tough votes because the situation we are in is very serious. People can't afford they can't find accessible housing. They can't afford to stay in their communities. I don't know how many children graduated from Union County high schools within 4 or 5 years ago, but if they went off to college or went to the service or did something else and came back, could they find a place to live today? And the answer is no. There needs to be some give and take, but I wouldn't underestimate the circumstances that we are facing by any stretch. And it is one that needs to be solved by the people that you vote for every November. And there are some communities who've said, nope, somebody else's problem. I don't think that happens to be a realistic answer or a responsible one for that matter. That doesn't mean every project is a perfect project and there shouldn't be some give and take, but I think we have a very serious situation, but I'd also say it's an opportunity. William talked about this at the end. I really believe that kind of a prosperity with purpose is possible if we're thoughtful in how we do it. Doesn't underestimate the circumstances we face today. And by the way, there's going to be 2,000 construction workers being dropped off in New Albany in the next 9 months. So we're going to add that on top of what we have here. And that's, again, whether you want to believe that these folks are coming or not, they are. So how are we going to accommodate this growth?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I mean, there's definitely urgency. When you look at the types of communities that are experiencing growth, Marysville's attractive. And Marysville's plan for that, from what I've seen, you've got the zoning, you've got the comprehensive plan. If Marysville can accommodate growth in a way that continues to provide that housing, that continues to maintain that quality of life and character, I think it'll get to that urgency, to solve that urgency. If it doesn't, one of two things will happen. So we also do transportation planning, and that means those families, they're going to have to live somewhere, and that means they're going to have to drive, and that's going to increase congestion on your roads. It's going to make 33 even busier. Or the other option is they'll build in communities that are close to here, but maybe not to the level that you would want or expect in a community like Marysville. So the idea is if you can grow in a way that accommodates that urgency, that continues to reinforce your quality of life, I think there's a lot of strength in that, and there's a lot that can be done to get in front of the urgency of the housing crisis.
Great question, great answer. The other thing, we have multiple companies that are actually housing employees at our local hotels. Our occupancy rates are actually higher than the average in Ohio because we have employers having employees live in a hotel and being transported to their place of work every day. That's how critical housing is. So we have a question from Jason over here.
Thank you, Savannah and John and William. Jason Duff from Small Nation. So you mentioned political will is something we have to work together as a group to really lobby and advocate the importance with the statistics that you shared. Can you speak to, once we get over that hurdle, what we can do to really attract more housing developers to this area, and what are some of the friction points that often you see in communities that are holding up other quality developers coming to Union County to build more housing?
I'm going to give it to John in a second. I want to start with the collaboration, though, because a community like Marysville has a great partnership with their county and their neighbors. It's really important that if the housing isn't going to happen here, it's going to happen nearby. And so making sure those conversations, that collaboration is happening to make sure that the quality of life here continues to get better is going to be really important. I know John's got developers here and elsewhere, so how do we do that, John?
First off, all BIA developers are quality, for those of our members in the room. I would say a couple things, Jason, and I appreciate what you do and around our state and educating folks on how to revitalize communities. Years ago, and I'll be transparent with you guys, there used to be many land developers in central Ohio and around the United States who developed land and sold lots to builders to build homes. I can count the land developers on my two hands in central Ohio right now who are in that business. Because of regulatory actions and how long it takes to get a project approved and through, they simply do not exist. And it is very problematic and difficult for a new developer to just, if one of you in this room said, I want to develop buildings, you would have to find a community that was either needed somebody to come in a very bad way, or was extremely well capitalized and knew how to work and navigate the system. Because the way the current system for land approvals in Central Ohio and really across the United States is set up, it is very challenging for folks to come in. So years ago, about 80% of lots and homes sold in Central Ohio were developed by an independent developer and then sold to builders. That's probably flipped now. And 90% of our builders are self-developing their lots because they're really the only ones that are able to do so. So how do you make it attractive? I think you can make it attractive in a variety of ways. But making sure the builders and the developers know that the process in those communities is going to be welcoming and not adversarial, I think is the first one. And then once a project is approved, that, hey, once you get this done, here's how we're going to work and collaborate together to get it done. And I think it's that spirit of collaboration. I guarantee you, no builders or developers want to have an antagonistic relationship. And I think if communities tell the development industry kind of what their vision is, people are pretty happy to meet it and try to meet the community where they want to be. But it has to be a collaborative effort.
So, okay, sorry. So from what I hear in the community, can you talk about, I hear people say, well, why did they pick to develop that lot? They should have done the one next door. Or why aren't they building in Milford Center or Richwood? Can you talk about how infrastructure in these smaller communities aren't there, and that's why Marysville is being looked at, and then also discuss how you can't force someone to sell their land just because you thought that's where the subdivision should go?
Yeah, well, that's pretty much it. I would say when I was fortunate enough to be hired by the BIA a little more than 5 years ago, I never imagined the amount of time I would spend talking about sewer. But the reality is it controls everything, as do utilities. I think Marysville smartly invested in expansion of water and sewer many years ago. And I think that is what has helped this community remain so attractive to commercial industry. And it also makes it attractive to residential developers. And we cannot build, you can have the greatest plot of land ever, but if there are no utilities for it, it's going to make it very challenging to get them there. And I think that is one of the big hurdles we have in Central Ohio. I think when you look at Licking County, for instance, and what's happening there, one of their big challenges is going to be who's providing the utility services to the growth that's going to come to that particular county. Union County has an advantage, and I think that's part of the reason people are gravitating here. And believe me, you want to be ahead of this game and invest in infrastructure, because if you don't, William alluded to this earlier, it gets more expensive and it gets more challenging to build roads, to lay sewer and water after development started to occur.
Yeah, and thank you for the second question. It was a good one too. You know, when we look at Union County as a whole, we're seeing growth, but you're seeing growth where there's infrastructure and where it's convenient for folks. So certainly Honda and its suppliers are a big driver for growth here, but you're also, the 77,000 people in Union County are right next door to a county with 1 million people. And so a lot of folks are going to want to be convenient to get to those jobs and be in a great school district and a great community. And that's why you're seeing more growth along that 33 corridor than you might see in Richwood or some of those other communities, which are great villages, but we're not expecting to see the same kind of growth there just yet, because there's still so much that folks are looking for in a quality community like Marysville, that it's ready, that's planned, that has the infrastructure.
Great question, great answer. We have time for one more question to get everyone out of here quickly.
Hi, I'm Michelle Coolwine, and I think one of the questions I want to ask you, I live 1 mile between Delaware and Union County, okay? And I think the biggest thing is that how do we get across to the people that live here? I'm a farmer. I know there's going to be growth. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we are having are our residents that are here that don't want anyone else. And they come into these meetings and they throw avid fits. I sat with one of my landowners in Delaware County last year Don Kenny was trying to get a development through. They spent over a year on it and $156,000, and it was turned down, and that 81 acres was right beside the sewer plant, right? So how can we best address to get some of these regulations so it can go quicker? That, you know, if you have a year invested and then they turn around, they kick you around, and you got to start the whole process over again. And what would be a great way to involve the people so that they're not getting removed from these meetings by the sheriff's department? So.
These regulations.
Yeah, it's fine by me.
Yeah,
Okay. I would say the biggest, you know, if I show up to a meeting, it's, well, that's John from the BIA, the builders pay him to say that. And that is true, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But it also doesn't mean it's not, what I'm saying isn't the truth. And what we need here in the region, quite frankly, is more neighbors to show up in support of projects and the business community. And, you know, I think what Eric and the team have done here in terms of connecting these issues from the business side of things with housing and with the community is really important. We need those businesses to show up and explain their point of view, because when a council hears from 5 neighbors that are really upset and they went onto that cesspool called next door and see what's you know, what people are saying, it makes it really negative. I will tell you just a brief anecdote. I spoke at a Rotary meeting in Delaware County a while ago, and there's some people who were pretty upset with my presentation. I don't often get bouquets when I'm done, but the gentleman was older, and he said, "My family moved to Delaware County in 1837, and if we had the same frame of mind as you people, I'd be the only SOB in this room." And the truth is, everybody typically moves here, and it's a great community, and we should embrace people wanting to be in our communities. And if we're at the table and we're talking about it, we can talk about on what terms that those developments occur. But simply saying no and bad discourse certainly doesn't help anybody. And I think our building community is trying to do a better job of talking to residents on the front end of projects. That's important. And meeting with them and trying to alleviate their concerns. You know, but I'll give you an example. One builder met with some residents, alleviated their concerns, or so they thought, but by doing so, then another group of neighbors was mad at them. So then they have to go back to the drawing board and have their engineers rework plans, all of which cost money. And it continues to happen. So the best thing that you can do is show up and support. And tell your elected leaders that you support it. Maybe, and meet with the builder. Most of them are thrilled to meet with somebody who supports their project. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. They may take a picture or something so they can memorize the moment. But I think that's what we need, and we need the business community and job creators to step up and explain why it's important as well.
And I think, just to emphasize, we work with communities to help them do the things that you might need. Give them the tools, give them the context of what's going on. But I'll finish just by saying it's really important to make this personal. When you look at that survey that Savannah had, one of the top reasons for people moving to this community is to be closer to family. Just think about that for a second. These aren't strangers. These are your neighbors' kids or parents or aunts or uncles or whoever. When you're talking about the need for housing, it's for people who want to be close to family. It's for people who really want to be a part of a community and build Marysville and its character. And I think that message gets lost. And there are different ways to get that message out there, but to say to your neighbors, to say to your elected officials, hey, I want there to be room in my community for when my kid wants to come back from college and get that first job at Honda, they can live here and not have to commute an hour. When I retire, I sure hope there's a nice place to take care of me or a place that I don't have to mow grass. I think it's really important to share that personal story, because you can get lost in the numbers, you can get lost in the cranes or the regulatory process, but at its heart, it's really a personal story about making room for your neighbors, making room for your families. So I'll just finish with that.
So that's a great answer. Thank you both for that. You know, the other comment, when I see that fact that, or the data point up there that you set up there, John, that only 12% of the people in Union County can afford a new house, right? We have the second highest household income in the state of Ohio. And that you think about that stat, it's pretty impressive, or actually kind of scary when you think of it that way. But the other thing too, we have a lot of developers that are looking at our community. They want to expand. These are housing developers, and we're at a point where dialogue has to happen, and that's why we're doing these series to create this dialogue in the community, to talk about what growth means to you and how we maintain our small town atmosphere, but we also find ways to grow together. And that's really the purpose of this. And so let's give these two a round of applause for all their great work. Really, really great dialogue, great discussion tonight. We have two sessions. We have a session each month. Our next session is May 31st. We have the former mayor of Tiffin, Ohio, Bill Fruth, who will be here. He will talk about how an economy works, how housing and the local economy, the manufacturing, how they all work together as an engine and why it's important. And then in June, our June meeting, we will have three housing developers that have built in Marysville or are planning to build in Marysville and Union County to discuss their plans and why they selected our community to actually expand. So that will be in June. And then July, we will have a superintendent's panel to talk about how growth impacts schools and what that means to school districts. So those are the next 3 months and so on. And Savannah, you want me to say something else? Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.